Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Yusuf Aram. 2 weeks, that's all it took for the Assad regime to crumble. A lightning advance by opposition forces, outmanned and outgunned, brought an end to Syria's 13-year civil war, and with it, nearly 6 decades of Assad family rule. The Syrian opposition now controls Damascus and is racing to establish order. The rapid collapse stuns Syria, the region, and the world. But it raises a critical question. Was Assad's regime on life support all along? And what kind of turning point does this mark for Syria and the Middle East? While Syrians at home and abroad celebrate Assad's fall, the country remains anything but stable. Israel has launched continuous airstrikes and seized a buffer zone in the occupied Golan Heights, drawing condemnation from several Arab nations. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan emphasized the need to preserve Syria's territorial integrity. He also welcomed the liberation of Tel Rifaat and Manbij in northern Syria, cities long plagued by the YPG terror group. The question now is whether Syria can rebuild after years of devastation and how regional powers will vie for influence in shaping its future. For more, joining me now from Damascus is Sinan Hatay. He's a research fellow at the Omran Center for Strategic Studies. From Washington, D.C., foreign policy analyst Rich Utsin, and from Doha, Tamer Karmat, an associate professor at the Doha Institute for Graduate Studies. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. Sinan, you're basically at ground zero of this political transition. I want to know, what's the feeling right now in Damascus? Is it hope? Is it concern? Is it uncertainty? And also, what's next in the transition?
Well, Yusuf, it's a mix of all kinds of feelings. There is jubilation, there is a lot of also hope and looking at the potential of a freed country at last. But there is also concern about how the next phase of the country will be run. Who will be in charge? What is the government? What is the future of the Syrian social contract? What is the new Syrian national identity? The country has been under the Assad regime and rule for now over 40 years and under the Ba'ath for another 60 years. So there is a lot of anticipation and people are looking at the Syrian opposition to take the right decisions and also to be as assertive as needed, but as open and inclusive as possible as well. But in general, people are right now in jubilation. They've never thought that this day will come. There is a lot of unbelief and dust is settling. The people are back on streets. They're happy to see people from all over Syria coming to join them in celebration of Assad toppling. There's people from Idlib, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, all across the country here in Damascus in unification and hoping for a better future for Syria.
Rich, HTS, a designated terror group, their leader, Golani, a designated terrorist, also the main character, basically, of this last push to overthrow Assad. It's a very tricky situation, I think, for Western countries looking at it. He's trying to send some positive messaging. It seems like he's making all the right moves at the moment. Could this lead to a U.S. or a British delisting, as is being reported? And what type of future does he have? Can he be the leader? Will he be an advisor?
Well, I think the experience of the West, the United States, the UK, our other allies, and perhaps even Turkey in this regard, in conducting counterterrorism over the last several decades has been that you cannot kill all the terrorists. Ultimately, there has to be a political solution for terror to end. And in this case, we have a fairly unusual thing in that we have somebody who's on a terror listing with roots in al-Qaeda, who has expressed an interest, if you will, in becoming legitimate. So Golani, I guess we're calling him Sharah now by the family name, has expressed through indirect contacts with Westerners and international observers that he wants to get delisted. He wants HTS delisted. He's willing to disband HTS, and that his ambition was to get rid of Assad. And after that, that he is a Syrian first and foremost and not an international jihadist. Now, I would not say the United States should take that at face value. We can't forget the fact that he was likely involved in attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq when he was there in almost 20 years ago now. but a roadmap of sorts, where it's sort of a conditions-based process. If he lives up to all the promises he's been making about not engaging in revenge killings, about being respectful of Syrian national unity and all the diverse groups in Syria, and ultimately the test will be, will he be on good terms with the international community? And yes, that includes Israel, the United States, and the West. It won't be a comfortable fit given his background. The Syrian people, especially those on the side of the spectrum that support Shura or Jolani, have an axe to grind and have some grievances vis-a-vis the West, and why this war in Syria, why Assad's rule was essentially propped up through negligence and international complicity for decades, right? So that's going to have to turn a new page, a new chapter. It will take leadership. And if he's not the only man, right? His forces weren't even the majority of those fighting against Assad, but he's the most visible figure. If he participates in power sharing, and if he helps shape a follow-on, a transition government, and ultimately a new government that is in accordance with international standards and not reflective of his past, I think a path to delisting is realistic.
Talking about, Rich said he's not the only man, and HTS isn't the only group. There's a lot of groups that participated in these operations that led to the ousting of Assad. What type of power sharing or lack thereof are you expecting in this transition phase? Will HTS, will Jolani, standing at the gates of Rome, share this power, or will he seize it for himself and his group?
Adam, I think it's a very good question. The expectations of the Syrian people are very clear to everyone. The Syrians, of course, deserve a very representative and legit government or a coalition that will take over this very tricky transition. It has to represent all Syria and all Syrian groups with the diversity we know about Syria. And at the same time, it has also to tackle also unfinished businesses. Syria remains a divided country. You have the Kurds-dominated territory, the YPG. Then you have Israel now is again incursioning into Syrian lands and occupying Syrian lands. And I'm surprised that the international community is not vocal and condemning this new occupation of Syrian territories and bombing of Syrian infrastructure, why the Syrians are just taking a breath and celebrating toppling down Assad's regime. So it's, to be honest, there are vast challenges awaiting for the new upcoming Syrian government, which still I don't see it forming. The international community is very vigilant now, and the expectations are very high from these parties. And I hope from my heart that they will be very smart and they will take the Syrians people expectations at a very serious way and unite and form a very cohesive and inclusive social contract.
Sinan, I want to ask you very quickly, how are the social services? Because there was talk that banks were going to open up today. But the actual question I want to ask you is the relationship among these opposition groups, not how they're going to participate in the transition government, but how does HTS get along with SNA? How do they get along with FSA and other opposition groups?
Yeah, very important question. Unfortunately, the track record of HTS in dealing with other groups in Syria hasn't been the best. We've seen them engaged over the years in a lot of competition over hegemony. But in the last few months, we've witnessed a change and shift in dynamics. We've seen them more open to work with SNA groups, and they also demonstrated some openness to work with the state technocracy and bureaucracy when they reached Aleppo, same when they reached Damascus. But the proof is in the pudding. We have to wait more and see how will this persist. How open will they be to a new set of communities that they've never ruled before? HTS previously has been mostly operational in Idlib and parts of Western Aleppo. Now we have to see how they will react and how they will engage with the rich communities of Damascus, of Aleppo, of Hama, of Homs, of Deir ez-Zor, of Tartus and Latakia. And these are very rich and diverse in different manners. They have their own inspiration. They have their own set of skills. And HTS or the Salvation Government needs this kind of expertise. They don't have the technical depth or enough capacity to be able to run a country as complex as Syria. And I think this is now a historical opportunity for them to prove to the whole world that the transition they went through over the years, from Qaeda to a less extremist and hopefully a mainstream opposition, mainstream, now not an opposition group anymore, but an active actor on the Syrian scene, that will also be matched by actions, not only words. And I think for the first time, for a long time, the rest of the opposition at large, as well as the Syrian communities, are open. They are much more receptive, and they are on the receiving part. So now it's all about Sharia and his Salvation Government to show serious steps. They need to engage with the private sector, with the public sector. They need to run the country smoothly. They are currently depending on the willing among the Syrian bureaucracy. They need also to pick which actors among the Syrian bureaucracy are actually dependable. They can actually deliver, that they are not engaged, were previously engaged in state corruption or in dealing with rogue actors. That also demands a lot of intelligence, a lot of sensitivity and sensibility towards the new kind of people that never were exposed to work before.
A lot of opportunities and challenges, but one of the big question marks is what's going to happen with the Syrian Democratic Forces and their core element, the YPG, a group that Turkey views as a terror group, an existential threat. Rich, what's going to happen with this group? I mean, they're in northeast Syria. Turkey views them as a threat. The SNA has been engaging them militarily. What type of future do you see for this group?
Well, I think the wartime exigency for the United States and the coalition of relying on the YPG as within the framework of the SDF as a primary instrument against ISIS made sense for a certain period of time from the perspective of Washington. It's always been clear, though, that is not in the long term a sustainable policy. What you're talking about is a Kurdish minority that is probably nationally about 10% of the population of Syria. A portion of that lives east of the Euphrates, where they have control over vast, predominantly Sunni Arab areas. So the idea that this ideologically extreme movement, which has been useful against ISIS, is somehow going to be the political authority over these broad areas like Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, Manbij, which is now in the hands of the opposition, really was not in the cards as a long-term possibility. I've been of the opinion for a long time that the only way for the Kurdish and other populations of northeast Syria to be in a stable and politically engaged framework would be for them to be engaged with the rest of Syria. Now that's possible because Assad's gone. What that implies, though, is that over time there has to be an integrating process. There has to be a diminution of the independent military capabilities of the SDF, which have been built up by the United States with an eye towards ISIS. But undoubtedly, now that there's a new government in Damascus, pose a threat to the monopoly on the use of force, which typically is the hallmark of statehood. So how do we get there? How do we get to the point where the Kurds are secure in the towns and the areas in which they are a majority, Kobani being a primary example, where they're at peace and integrating on a path, at least, to integration with the rest of the now opposition-led government, and not perceived by Ankara as a threat? As they lose territory, which they've already lost a significant amount of territory that they control, they become less of a threat, both to Ankara and to Damascus. And I think there's going to have to be some delicate negotiations because, look, the reality is in Washington that there is still a residual pool of goodwill for the role that the SDF played in defeating the physical caliphate of ISIS. So now that that's done, and now that the Syrian government is interested in extending its authority over the entirety of the country, there's going to have to be a negotiated path by which the United States ultimately does what President Trump has said he would like to do and withdraws U.S. troops, by which the safety and security of Kurdish and non-Kurdish populations is assured and their political rights respected, and that the really unprecedented amount of ammunition and advanced weaponry and military forces, up to 100,000 or so, which are way beyond local need, is reduced over time. I think that's what I see happening. Now, the ugly way to get there would be a new round of fighting, which pits the new government and its forces against the SDF and leads to a sloppy, messy withdrawal from the United States and a lot of risk of mutual clash between U.S.-backed forces and Turkish-backed forces, and God forbid, even some risk for the troops of either of our countries. The alternative to that is some careful and deliberate negotiations, some consultations between Washington and Ankara, and a pathway that gets everybody to calm down, and a transition to where all these territories are integrated with the new government of Syria.
Mm-hmm. Tamer, while everyone's celebrating in Syria, obviously there's this major event, all the neighbors looking at what's going on with caution. One of those neighbors acting, taking out military installations with airstrikes. I'm talking about Israel, entering a buffer zone, and then even going beyond that buffer zone. How is this Israeli incursion into Syrian sovereign land being viewed throughout the Arab world, in Turkey, in Syria?
Adam, I think it's viewed in a very troubling way. Obviously the Israelis are destabilizing the entire scene now and sending, in my opinion, the wrong message to any form of new governance in Syria that will focus on rebuilding Syria and reestablishing it as a healthy democratic country. I don't buy any excuses the Israelis are using when they target major facilities, military facilities, infrastructures. The Israelis have always had an upper hand in Syria, and they were able to bomb left and right during even the Assad regime. But when you deprive a new emerging system of governance of its force, a force is important. To make sure that any state is able to exercise its authority. You're sending a message that you want to create chaos, that it's not welcoming. But again, I believe, in my opinion, that this is Netanyahu's factor. Netanyahu is creating this fourth Trump as a way of distracting everything that is happening around him when it comes to his political legacy and political future as well. Now he's creating this new front with Syria, just to extend his stay in government, and also to distract the Israeli opinion from the real issues he's struggling with, which is an unfinished war in Gaza, now an opening front with Lebanon and then Syria. And that's the Netanyahu factor, which really, in my opinion, it needs to be handled by the U.S. very soon, because yes, if there is a new Middle East under creation happening now, and you want this to be a stable, reliable Middle East, also this has to affect Israel by itself. Israel needs to be reformed from within. But sadly, I don't see this happening, because we know the very nature of unique relations between the upcoming administration and Netanyahu. And at the same time, again, we're witnessing an expanding of Israel's occupation of Syrian land. And it is sending the wrong messages in every direction.
Mm-hmm. Sinan, I want to ask you, what type of role can Turkey and Qatar play in the future? And also, since you're on the ground, how is the current state and security of minorities, especially Syria's Christians? Because I know that's been being talked a lot about in the media. There's a lot of concerns.
Thank you very much for the questions. So I think, well, first let's start with Turkey. Turkey is the country that has the longest borders with Syria. There is history that cannot be overlooked, and there is historical ties and commercial ties that are too strong to be broken. Even during the 14 years of war, Turkey, for example, remained the biggest bilateral trade partner with Syria despite all. And if you account also the relationship that exists between Turkey and the opposition groups in Idlib and in northern Aleppo, in particular the SNA and the local councils that have been part of the Syrian interim government, then everything points towards Turkey playing a major role in the future of Syria. The expectations are very clear. The Syrian people are looking for Turkey for exporting their experience in local councils, for example, and local administration, in helping them rebuilding the country, bringing the experience to rehabilitate the local infrastructure. And I think as for Qatar, there is also financial, let's be honest, expectations. Qatar has been a very generous donors and supporters of post-Arab Spring countries. We've seen their support in different parts of the Arab world, and the Syrian people are expecting the Qataris, as well as the Saudis and the Emiratis, the rest of the rich Arab countries, to step in and to shape in also in the stabilization of the country.
I want to ask Rich a quick question. 5 weeks out, Donald Trump returning to the White House. What does that mean for Syria? And also, what about the oil? Are Syrians going to get their oil back, or will America continue guarding it?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think at the outset of any new U.S. presidential administration, there's lots of assessments about where we're at on things and sort of opportunity to review policy and change direction a little bit. So clearly this is a case where President Trump, during his first term, said he did not see a continued role for U.S. troops in Syria. In his reported conversation with RFK Jr., he appeared to reiterate that view. And yet there are a number of people in the Congress and certainly in Washington who think that it's still prudent for the U.S. to maintain military presence. But I mean, the ground is shifting here with a government in Damascus now that has the support of the majority of the Syrian people, which is, I think we can infer that based on the support to the revolution and what we've seen at their embassies around the world, even formerly regime-associated people hanging the new Syrian flag. I think we can infer that unlike the illegitimate Assad regime, we now have a government that's going to be messy, but it's going to be legitimate. And at a certain point, if the United States does not have the permission or request from that government of Syria, then the previous authorities by which we've operated against ISIS in that area will have to be called into question. I guess what I'm suggesting is that there's a decreasing utility in the U.S. military presence there. Now, if Syria is going to be a successful state, it has to be integrated into Western markets. It has to have continued humanitarian assistance. It can't be a continued war zone. And I think that's probably the lens through which the new team will look at this. My guess would be that the Trump administration will say, how do we lower our own vulnerabilities? Again, look for some assurances for the partners who have worked with us in the past. But yeah, that oil and the water, which are predominantly in the northeast part of the country, are the patrimony of the Syrian people. They're not going to be held sort of in an escrow account by a U.S. proxy in perpetuity. That's going to end, and I think it's going to end fairly soon. And if the United States is smart about it, it will engage in a productive manner with incentives and, if necessary, some disincentives for the new group in Damascus, the new government, to make sure that the transition allows for the U.S. to take on the role of an economic partner, a diplomatic partner, not a military presence in the country, and to help with the reconstruction of a new Syria that does play by internationally accepted rules and lives up to all the promises that we've heard in the early days from Shara and the others.
Tamar, 30 seconds. How important is it for Syrian refugees to come back?
Extremely important, Erem. I mean, any country needs its people to come back and to initiate a reconstruction process. I mean, the manpower is very important, and it's an essential element in any process for any country. But the thing is, again, there are preconditions. I mean, I'm sure many Syrians are looking forward to come back, but it's a very tricky transition. And I think all the eyes now is on Damascus and the new coalition. How will it appear? Will it be representatives? What type of assurances it will offer to all Syrians to encourage them to go back? So I think we are in a very vigilant phase now.
Mm-hmm. Tamar, Rich, Sinan, thank you very much for helping me look into the future and see what's awaiting us in Syria.
Thanks, Yusuf.
And that's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Yusuf Aram. If you got any comments, please share them with us on X at Straight Talk TRT. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can access exclusive content. Until next time, take care and goodbye.